Welcome to the deep dive. Today we're stepping away from the usual focus, not the spotlight or the piano. We're pulling back the curtain on someone absolutely crucial, one of the greatest and, wow, most enduring storytellers in modern music.
Right.
A man whose words, I mean, they've soundtracked multiple generations, yet his own life, his own complexity, often gets a bit overshadowed by his partner's, huge stardom.
Right.
We are talking about Bernie Taupin.
Yeah, absolutely. When most people think of those decades of just smash hits from Elton John, they picture the costumes, the stage presence, all that theater.
Exactly.
But Taupin, he's really the silent engine behind it all. He's the tireless source of all that vivid imagery, the narrative, the characters that really define the sound of that collaboration. He gave it the soul, you could say, the literary backbone.
That's a great way to put it. And our mission today really is to look far beyond just that iconic partnership. We want to uncover the complexity of Taupin's entire career. As a writer, sure, but also as this prolific, genre-hopping collaborator, a visual artist, even an experimental performer at times. We're giving the lyricist his moment.
And it's so important. We really need to start by just establishing the sheer scale of his importance, his longevity.
Yeah.
This isn't some fleeting thing.
No.
The collaboration with Elton John started way back in 1967. Just think about that for a second. 6 decades. And the quality, the consistency of what they've produced, it's staggering.
That longevity, it's why the big awards are, well, really piling up now, late in his career. They got into the Songwriters Hall of Fame back in '92, sure.
Right, ancient history almost.
Yeah, but their career isn't just history, it's still going. Just this year, 2024, they were awarded the Gershwin Prize for Popular Song. That's one of the absolute highest honors for American music.
And Taupin himself, personally, got the Ivor Novello Award for Outstanding Contribution to British Music in 2024, too.
Oh, wow.
These recent awards, they really feel like timely proof that the industry is finally recognizing him as this singular force.
Yeah.
Separate from just the hits. He's fundamental to how modern popular songs are built.
And what's just wild is that this monumental partnership, the one that basically defined the sound of the 70s and kept going, it was almost completely accidental.
Yeah.
It wasn't some clever A&R plan or a mutual friend connection. It literally sprang from a single classified ad.
In the New Musical Express, the NME.
The NME. Incredible.
Answering one little ad in 1967 changes the course of global music history. It's amazing. And that's really where our story has to begin, connecting this shy young poet from rural isolation with the biggest stages in the world. Let's unpack where that poetic imagination came from.
Okay, so the power, the specificity in Taupin's early lyrics, all that vivid detail, that sense of place, sometimes melancholic, the really grounded characters, it makes so much more sense when you look at where he actually grew up. He wasn't, a product of swinging London or the mod scene. He was born in 1950 in a literal, quite isolated farmhouse in Lincolnshire.
That first place was called Flatter's House. And the sources, they confirm it didn't even have electricity initially.
Wow.
Which immediately tinks this picture, doesn't it? Remote, almost like stepping back in time. His family did move later to a more established place called Roston Manor. That was after his father, Robert, got a promotion to farm manager. So those early years had a kind of rustic simplicity, maybe, but definitely a connection to the land.
But that relative stability, it wasn't his whole youth, was it?
No, not at all. Later in his childhood, they moved again, this time to a place called Malt Kiln Farm in Amby-by-Spill. And this move, well, it represented a much tougher financial reality.
Right.
The farm was pretty rough, and the family's main income came from battery farming chickens for eggs.
So quite a step down in some ways.
Yeah, and we shouldn't gloss over the conditions there. The house at Malt Kiln Farm, it lacked proper heating, didn't have up-to-date plumbing. This contrast, moving from a more established property to this kind of harsh, gritty reality of rural working life, where his surroundings were much rougher than his ambitions.
Yeah.
That feels absolutely critical to understanding his writing voice.
I can see that.
It must have bred this really keen sense of observation and maybe a desire for escape, too. You hear that all through his early work, especially on albums like Tumbleweed Connection.
Yeah, that sense of romanticized isolation, maybe, surrounded by hard work, rural austerity. But he clearly developed this early knack for writing, even though, by all accounts, he wasn't exactly a star student academically.
Not at all. But this is where his family background provided something crucial, a kind of counterpoint.
How so?
Well, his mother, Daphne, she'd studied French literature, so there was an intellectual foundation there in the home. But the real key influence, it seems, was his maternal grandfather, John Leonard Patchett Court, who he called Poppy Court.
Poppy Court. And he was
a man of letters, a Cambridge graduate, actually, and a classics teacher. Now, that's a crucial detail, isn't it?
definitely Cambridge classic.
He seems to have instilled in young Bernie this deep, almost classical appreciation for nature, for narrative structure, and for poetry itself.
So how does that classics background, show up in songs that became huge pop hits? That seems like a leap.
Well, I think it manifests in the narrative complexity. Most pop songs, especially back then, dealt with pretty simple, immediate emotions, right? Love found, love lost.
Sure.
But Taupin's early work, it often builds character arcs, creates whole settings. Look at a song like Live On or The King Must Die. These are like little short stories set to music. They use classical literary devices, allegory, metaphor. It feels like a direct line back to the narrative poetry he learned to appreciate from his grandfather. He wasn't just writing for his chorus verse. Sometimes he was crafting these miniature epics.
So he had this rich inner world developing, but his actual life after school sounds, well, profoundly aimless for a while. He left school at 15.
Yeah, 15.
And the immediate path wasn't music or poetry.
No, not directly. He worked for a short time as a trainee in the print room of the Lincolnshire Standard. Apparently had some aspirations towards journalism, which, makes sense for someone with a writing bent.
Sure.
But when that didn't really stick, his mid to late teenage years were just spent drifting, hanging out, drinking, hitchhiking to youth club dances, just sort of existing on the fringes, waiting for something. It feels like a period of just wandering and waiting for, inspiration, direction.
Which finally culminated, like we mentioned, in that huge moment when he was 17. He sees the Liberty Records ad in the NME.
Yeah. And that ad, it just set this whole incredible career in motion.
It was just a general call for songwriters, wasn't it?
It's talent search.
Yeah.
And here's the absolute stroke of fate. Reginald Dwight, the guy who had become Elton John, answered the exact same advertisement.
No way.
Yes. Both showed up for an audition.
Wait,
Neither of them passed.
Both rejected.
Both rejected. But the A&R man there, a guy named Ray Williams, had this, miraculous foresight, or maybe just a practical solution. He knew Reginald Dwight was talented musically but couldn't write lyrics.
Right.
And he also had this pile of lyrics submitted by people who presumably couldn't write music. So Williams just handed John a sealed envelope. And inside were Taupin's poems.
Just like that, a sealed envelope.
Just like that. Just like this perfect prepackaged solution just fell into his lap.
That's incredible.
And the rest, genuinely, it started on the London Underground ride home. John, rejected by Liberty Records, opens the envelope on the train, sees the poetry, and apparently started working out melodies almost immediately.
Wow.
The music partnership was born right there, out of shared rejection and the sheer, beautiful serendipity of an A&R guy connecting a poet from the sticks with a technically brilliant pianist from London.
It's an origin story that just perfectly underscores that theme of collaboration, doesn't it? How two people, individually kind of incomplete for the job of songwriting, became this absolutely unstoppable force together.
So once they connected, the genius of that partnership, it became apparent really quickly. Not just because the songs were great, but because they're totally unique and fiercely protected writing process.
Right. The Two Rooms documentary from '91 really highlighted this, comparing them to Lennon-McCartney. Can you break down that methodology? Because this is where their dynamic is just fascinating.
It really is. What's truly remarkable is the structure, how it worked, especially back then.
Yeah.
Historically, Taupin writes the lyrics completely on his own, totally separate from John.
Okay.
He'd finish the words, sometimes pages and pages of this narrative poetry, and just hand them over. Then John would set them to music. And the key phrase is, with historically no further interaction.
Wow.
John is basically scoring a finished piece of literature.
That's just mind-boggling. So John receives a poem, right? A complete story, complete emotional map laid out in words. And then he finds the melody, the rhythm, the whole song structure to fit its, emotional architecture without sitting in the room, debating verses, changing lines.
Exactly. It's built on this foundation of pure implicit trust in Taupin's narrative instincts. John trusted the words would give him everything he needed.
And think about the technical challenge for John. If the lyrics are complex, maybe the meter is irregular.
Right.
He has to somehow bend the music around those words. That must lead to some really unusual song structures sometimes, breaking away from standard pop formulas.
Absolutely. And does the melody just reinforce the emotion in the lyrics, or does it sometimes reinterpret it? It's this really unusual, powerful symbiosis.
I always wonder if that lyrics first approach ever led to, like, misinterpretations, or maybe the music fundamentally changed the feeling of what Taupin originally intended in the poem.
That's a question people always ask.
Mm-hmm.
But the general consensus, and from what they've both said, is that it rarely happened in a negative way. Or if it did, it resulted in a kind of happy accident.
Mm.
Taupin himself has talked about the surprise sometimes of hearing the finished song. He'd say John often found rhythms and moods that he didn't even consciously realize were inherent in the words he wrote.
Can you give an example?
Well, think about Rocket Man. The lyrics are quite dark, aren't they? This sci-fi poetry about deep space loneliness.
Yeah, existential.
But the music John set it to is almost, well, jaunty. A mid-tempo folk rock kind of groove.
Mhm.
And somehow that contrast actually makes the loneliness feel even more profound, more unsettling.
That's a great point. Okay, so that foundational process, Taupin writes words, John writes music, that's still the gold standard for them.
Pretty much. The sources do note that today maybe things are a little more interactive in the studio as the songs get developed, perhaps just because digital communication makes it easier,
Sure.
But that fundamental lyrics first rule, it seems to remain absolutely sacrosanct. The words come first.
And the output, my God, speaks for itself. Especially that first decade, the 1970s. Their run was just unbelievable.
Incredible.
Taupin seemed to move so seamlessly from these intimate, vulnerable moments to sprawling, almost epic narratives, sometimes all within the same album.
It started really with Your Song in 1970, their first massive hit. And it kind of established that template, didn't it? Romantic, deeply personal vulnerability, which was actually a huge shift from a lot of the heavier rock dominating the charts at the time.
Yeah, it stood out. And then came the sheer depth of the rest of that 70s catalog. It's just immense.
It's exhaustive, really. You look at Rocket Man, like we said, that brilliant take on loneliness through a sci-fi lens. Then there's Levon, this bizarre, multi-generational American story about a poor man's son named Levon, who has a son named Jesus. I mean, it's pure storytelling.
And crucially, the albums themselves had such depth beyond just the singles. You think about the deep cuts from the 70s that are now considered absolute classics, like Tiny Dancer.
Oh, yeah.
Which just perfectly evokes that wistful Southern California feeling, or the sheer literary richness of the Goodbye Yellow Brick Road album.
An absolute masterpiece.
Gave us the title track, obviously, but also the kind of sci-fi soul of Benny and the Jets and that classic New York melancholy and Mona Lisas and Mad Hatters and, of course, Don't Let the Sun Go Down on Me. Just unbelievable range.
That decade was so intense, though. They were releasing, an album almost every single year.
Pretty much.
It was inevitably followed by a necessary break, a hiatus. Between 77 and 79, they took some time off from the partnership.
What were they doing?
Well, Taupin collaborated with other people, including, interestingly, Alice Cooper. And John worked with other lyricists like Gary Osborne, quite successfully too. It seemed like a period where both of them needed to stretch their creative muscles independently for a bit.
But the partnership wasn't totally over.
No, they did collaborate sporadically during that time. But the full-time writing renewal really happened in 1983 with the album Too Low for Zero.
Ah, okay.
From that point forward, Taupin was once again Elton John's primary lyricist for his solo albums. It signaled a real long-term recommitment.
And the hits just kept coming through the 80s and 90s, didn't they? Maybe the sound shifted a bit towards tighter, maybe more immediately accessible pop structures sometimes?
Yeah, perhaps. The 80s brought us that incredibly resilient anthem, I'm Still Standing.
Love that one.
The soulful storytelling of, I guess that's why they call it the blues, and the very 80s Cold War imagery of Nikita.
And the 90s hits, too, while the music obviously evolved with the times, they still relied so heavily on Taupin's narrative depth. Songs like The One, Simple Life, and the sort of religiously themed Believe, they proved they could adapt their synergy, their process, to totally changing musical landscapes without losing that core identity.
And then came a moment where the partnership showed its ultimate emotional maturity, its sensitivity, the rewrite of Candle in the Wind.
For Diana, Princess of Wales, in 97, September 97.
Yes.
That was just such a profoundly charged global cultural moment. Taupin had this immense task.
Yeah.
Transform a song that was a very specific homage to Marilyn Monroe into this collective, national, almost universal eulogy.
Right.
That requires incredible lyrical empathy, doesn't it?
It really does. And Taupin himself, he explained his strategy quite deliberately. He said he wanted to make it sound like a country singing it.
Wow.
He didn't want the lyrics to feel like they came from one person's grief, but from the collective consciousness, the nation's grief.
Mm-hmm.
The task was huge, partly because the original song was already so famous, so ingrained.
And he somehow achieved that collective voice almost instantly. He mentioned that once he landed on those first couple of lines, starting with "Goodbye England's Rose," the rest of the lyrics just sort of fell into place.
Yeah.
That single opening line immediately redefined the subject, didn't it? And it gave the entire nation, the world really, a phrase to mourn with. It was masterful.
And their collaboration, it remains vital today. It's extended into film, into musical theater. While John worked with Tim Rice on big Disney projects, Taupin and John created Lestat, the musical, together in 2006.
Right, based on the Anne Rice novels.
Exactly. And they've contributed songs to animated films like Romeo and Juliet and its sequel, Sherlock Gnomes. They just keep finding new outlets for that shared talent.
And maybe the ultimate capstone recognition, in recent years anyway, came with the 2019 biopic Rocket Man.
Great film.
Yeah, and it didn't just celebrate their history, it actually produced a brand new collaboration between them for the movie I'm Gonna Love Me Again.
Which won them the Oscar.
Exactly. They won the Academy Award for Best Original Song in 2020, an Oscar nearly 6 decades into their working relationship. That's just an astonishing testament to their enduring friendship, their creative energy. It's incredible.
It's just far too easy, isn't it, to reduce Bernie Taupin's massive body of work down to simply Elton John's Lyricist.
Yeah, it's the shorthand everyone uses.
But if you really dissect his career, you realize he's this genuine chameleon. He's capable of adapting that unique storytelling voice of his to, well, virtually every corner of popular music. This is where you see his pure versatility shine.
Okay, so let's talk about that versatility, maybe starting with mainstream pop. His collaborations with the English composer Martin Page are really interesting here, showing his range outside of the typical Elton rock pop sound, specifically in that big 80s anthem rock style.
Right. We're talking about two massive anthems here that are tonally worlds apart.
Yeah.
Yet both feel like quintessential 80s hits, you know?
Which ones?
The first is We Built This City, recorded by Starship.
Yeah.
Huge, high energy almost, corporate rock sound.
Definitely. Divisive now, maybe, but massive then.
Massive then. And the second is the complete opposite. The soft focus romantic power ballad, These Dreams, recorded by Hart.
Wow, okay. The contrast is staggering. To write, We Built This City, he had to kind of abandon the sprawling, specific narratives of his 70s work, right? And distill the essence into these punchy, radio-ready hooks, generalized stadium chant themes.
Yeah, exactly. And then he just turns around and writes the completely different, introspective, romantic moves required for These Dreams.
Yeah.
It just shows he wasn't creatively locked into only his rural or classical influences. He could absolutely write to market demand when needed.
It proves he understands the mechanics, the craft of commercial songwriting, just as much as he understands narrative poetry. Okay, but moving away from huge commercial success for a moment, there's a collaboration that's really important for critical context, even though it was pretty much ignored commercially at the time. That's his work producing David Ackl's 1972 album, American Gothic.
Ah, yes.
Yeah.
American Gothic. This is an album that, yeah, it probably deserves its own deep dive someday. It's become this really influential cult classic for serious music fans, partly thanks to the, well, critical hyperbole it received back then.
Hyperbole is maybe the right word, but possibly deserved. Didn't a major critic call it something extraordinary?
Yes, the influential British music critic Derek Jewell, writing for the UK Sunday Times, famously described American Gothic as the S.G.D. Pepper of folk.
The S.G. Pepper of folk. Okay, wow. Why that comparison? What does that even mean?
Well, that comparison suggests monumental ambition, right? Innovation. S.G.T. Pepper was known for its complex studio production, its revolutionary orchestration, its conceptual unity. So what was Taupin, who was still really young, remember, what was he doing as a producer on American Gothic that warranted that kind of high praise?
Yeah, what was it?
It seems to be about the conceptual scope and the soundscape they created. Ackle's songwriting was already pretty complex, literate stuff. But Taupin's production, it embraced this really rich, dramatic orchestral framework. It blended classical arrangements with folk instruments, and Ackle's complex, often quite dark, thematic lyrics about American life.
So it wasn't just a singer-songwriter album.
Not at all. It was a sprawling, meticulously arranged concept piece. And Taupin, only in his early 20s, showed this incredible instinct for production, for thematic cohesion.
Yeah.
And that clearly impressed the critics enormously.
And how did that collaboration even happen, Ackles and Taupin?
It happened because David Ackles actually co-headlined Elton John's legendary American debut shows at the Troubadour in Los Angeles in 1970.
Ah, the Troubadour connection.
Yeah, it just shows Taupin's creative antenna were always up, right? Always seeking out interesting, complementary artists who are willing to push boundaries.
And his genre hopping just continued into some really wild, uncommon pairings after that.
Totally. In 1978, he co-wrote an entire album from the inside with Alice Cooper.
Alice Cooper, okay. That is a huge stylistic shift from producing folk or writing wistful rock ballads.
Right, shock rock. And later, in the late 80s, early 90s, he collaborated quite a bit with the French-American musician Josquin des Prez on numerous songs, stretching his vocabulary even further.
But maybe his most successful and perhaps longest-lasting triumph outside of the Elton John world came in a completely different genre again. Country music.
Yes. This is where his real penchant for storytelling, for character development, for that specific kind of Americana, it found a perfect, really resonant home.
It feels like a natural fit somehow.
It totally does. It was like a validation of his specific writing voice. The country world really welcomed that narrative structure he'd been honing since the 70s. For instance, Willie Nelson and Kid Rock, they recorded a song called Last Stand in Open Country, which was actually the title track from an album by Taupin's own band from the 90s, Farm Dogs. We'll talk about them in a bit.
Ah, okay. So Nelson picked up on his band's song.
Yeah, and Nelson clearly liked what he heard, because he went on to include 2 other Taupin songs on his own album, The Great Divide, one called This Face, and the really successful one, Mendocino County Line.
Right. Mendocino County Line was a big deal in country music, wasn't it?
Huge deal. Critically and commercially within that world. It was a duet between Willie Nelson and Leanne Womack. And it earned Taupin a Grammy Award in 2003.
A Grammy.
A Grammy. For Best Vocal Collaboration in Country Music. This is so crucial. A Grammy win, completely independent of the whole Elton John machine, for material that taps right into his deep love for the American landscape and storytelling.
That's fantastic. And the high-profile film work kept expanding his reach too, right? Beyond the Elton stuff.
Absolutely. In 2006, he won a Golden Globe Award.
Golden Globe for what?
For the lyrics to the song A Love That Will Never Grow Old, which featured very powerfully in the film Brokeback Mountain.
Oh, wow. Yeah.
The music for that was composed by the great Gustavo Santaolalla. Just beautiful, haunting work from both of them.
He really is a genuine collaborator, isn't he? Willing to work with anyone if the project is right.
Seems like it. We should also quickly mention he collaborated with other rock legends, too. He worked with Courtney Love on her 2004 solo album.
Really? Courtney Love?
Yep. And he co-wrote the title track for Brian Wilson's Christmas album, What I Really Want for Christmas, back in 2005.
Brian Wilson. Okay.
I mean, the list goes on. Taupin has truly proven he's fluent in the language of almost every major musical genre you can think of. He's not just Elton's guy.
It's interesting, isn't it? For a man who really defined himself as the quiet, written half of this massive, flamboyant musical duo, Taupin has actually had this surprisingly public and sometimes quite experimental solo career, trying to become a performer in his own right, moving beyond just the words on the page.
Yeah, it's a fascinating side thread. His earliest and probably most esoteric experiment came way back in 1971. It was a spoken word album simply titled Taupin.
A spoken word album in 1971.
Yeah, it's a very unusual artifact in rock history.
Yeah.
He basically recited some of his early poems over what the sources describe as impromptu sitar-heavy music.
Sitar-heavy. Who was playing?
Members of Elton's band, actually, like guitarist Davy Johnstone.
Okay. And what were the poems about?
Well, the contents were deeply personal, tying right back to his childhood, which we talked about. Side 1 was called Child. It included readings about his first 2 homes, Flatter's House and Roston Manor.
Ah, connecting back.
Exactly. And it also featured a poem called The Greatest Discovery, which looks at his own birth from the perspective of his older brother, Tony. That's a poem that Elton John later did set to music, quite famously.
Oh, right. I know that song. So it's interesting to compare the 2 versions then, his recitation versus Elton's musical take.
Definitely. The recitation puts the emphasis purely on the verbal rhythm, the words themselves, whereas John's interpretation gives the poem this soaring, really emotional melody. It's quite different. But the spoken word experiment was pretty short-lived. Taupin himself stated later that he was explicitly not pleased with how that album turned out.
You didn't like it. Why not?
It seems like maybe there was a conflict between his vision as the writer and the reality of being the performer, or maybe how the music framed the words. He didn't elaborate much, just that he wasn't happy with it.
Okay. But he did try the singing route again later, didn't he?
He did. In 1980, he released his first proper album as a vocalist, called He Who Rides the Tiger.
Did it do well?
No, it failed to chart. He followed it up in 1987 with another album called Tribe.
And that one.
Same story, really. Neither of those albums found much commercial success. And regarding that first solo effort, He Who Rides the Tiger, Taupin later kind of suggested he felt he lacked the creative control he really wanted over the final product.
Ah, that makes sense. A common creative conflict, right. The person who provides the source material steps into the spotlight and suddenly finds their original vision maybe diluted by producers, other musicians.
Exactly. He found himself on the receiving end of the process he usually initiated with Elton. He was the writer being interpreted rather than the interpreter.
But he did eventually find a way to bridge that earthier storytelling style with performance again, didn't he? In the mid-90s, but this time in a collaborative band setting. The group Farm Dogs.
Yes, Farm Dogs. Formed in 1996. They released 2 albums, Last Stand and Open Country and Immigrant Sons. And this project feels fundamentally important because it was described at the time as a conscious and actually quite successful throwback.
A throwback to what?
To the grittier, earthier sound of Tumbleweed Connection. You know that seminal 1970 album he co-wrote with John, which was so heavy on themes of the American West, rural life?
Okay. So Farm Dogs was like a deliberate return to his deepest thematic roots, the rugged, dusty narratives he always excelled at.
Pretty much. And notice the structure. In Farm Dogs, he went right back to that familiar, successful division of labor. He wrote the lyrics, but the music was a collaborative effort among the other band members.
So he provided the soul, the stories, and the others provided the sound.
Exactly. That seems to be the setup where he felt most comfortable performing, when he wasn't solely carrying the musical load.
Makes sense. Okay, so beyond musical performance, he also has a solid bibliography, right? Books.
Yeah, he's published his collected lyrics multiple times. There was an early collection back in 1973 that covered all the big hits up to Goodbye Yellow Brick Road. And then a more complete lyrics collection came out in 1994.
And didn't he write a memoir, too?
He did. In 1988, he published A Cradle of Halos, Sketches of a Childhood. But crucially, this autobiography was only released in the UK.
Oh, really? Just the UK?
Yeah, and it meticulously covered his rural upbringing, everything we talked about earlier, right up until 1969. It stops just as he's about to head off to London and meet Reginald Dwight.
So it's like the full, immersive backstory to the poems that started everything.
Precisely. It gives you the genesis of his poetry.
But the most maybe striking creative pivot of his later career isn't musical or literary at all, it's his visual art.
Yes, which represents a completely different kind of storytelling for him.
When did this start? Is it serious?
His career as a visual artist really took off around 2010. And this isn't just some casual hobby. His work consists of these large, mixed media, contemporary assemblages. They've been shown pretty extensively, collected across the U.S. and Canada. He actually attributes his lifelong passion for art, going way back, to his mother, Daphne.
Interesting. Is there a thematic link between his art and his lyrics?
Oh, absolutely. If you look at the consistency in his artwork, it links directly back to his life as this, well, Americanized Englishman. A hugely recurring element in his visual art is the incorporation of the American flag.
The flag.
Yes. Which just reinforces this idea, doesn't
Yeah.
it? That the themes he writes about in his country songs, his Americana rock lyrics, that whole mythology of the United States, it's not just lyrical fodder for him. It's a genuine, deep, artistic obsession that he now expresses visually on canvas and through assemblage.
So Bernie Taupin's professional life, it seems like a model of creative consistency, really, despite the genre hopping. But his personal life, it reflects more of a journey, doesn't it? Major changes, relocation, transformation.
Yeah, definitely. He's been married 4 times, for instance. And we track his move from England to the United States back in the mid-1970s. That was obviously a huge shift, personally, but also creatively.
How so creatively?
Well, relocating to the U.S., particularly California, seemed to really solidify the thematic direction of so much of his later work, that focus on American landscapes, characters, myths. It became even more central, maybe more authentic once he was living it.
And he fully committed to his adopted home, didn't he? Became a citizen.
Yeah, became a naturalized U.S. citizen in 1990. He currently lives down in Santa Barbara County, California. Deep in the heart of the territory, he's so often romanticized in his lyrics. His current marriage is to Heather Kidd, and they have 2 daughters together.
Okay. But we absolutely cannot move on without pausing for this one incredible biographical detail. It seems almost too perfect, like something out of one of his own songs. Too ruggedly poetic to be true.
Oh, I know where you're going with this.
The man who wrote Tiny Dancer and Goodbye Yellow Brick Road was a part owner of a world-famous bucking bull.
It's just the best anecdote, isn't it?
Yeah.
Little Yellow Jacket.
Little Yellow Jacket. It's phenomenal. It's like the physical embodiment of his whole Tumbleweed Connection aesthetic. And this wasn't just some casual investment, right? This bull was a star.
Oh, absolutely not casual. Little Yellow Jacket was a total superstar in the PBR, the Professional Bull Rider Circuit. He was named PBR Bull of the Year 3 years running. 2002, 2003, 2004.
3 years in a row.
Yeah. So for a man who wrote all these lyrics romanticizing cowboys, dusty roads, the rugged spirit of the American West, to actually co-own a champion bucking bull, it's the ultimate literal convergence of his art and his life. It's perfect.
It really is. It's just a perfect little anecdote that adds so much color and depth. It reminds you his connection to Americana isn't just literary, it's visceral, it's real. He literally put his money where his poetry was.
Exactly. And as we kind of look back at this long, incredibly varied career, the recognition, as we touched on earlier, has really culminated in a number of huge, monumental late career honors. And these firmly establish his legacy, deservedly, outside of the shadow of his partner's massive performance profile.
Right. So in 2022, he got that major recognition from his home country. He was appointed Commander of the Order of the British Empire, the CBE,
CD.
for his services to music, which feels like a powerful statement of recognition from the establishment he sort of left behind decades ago.
Yeah, a homecoming honor, in a way. Then, in 2023, came the ultimate rock and roll recognition, induction into the Rock and Roll Hall of Fame.
Was that with Elton?
No, this was specifically for him in the Musical Excellence Award category.
Ah, okay. What's that category for?
It specifically recognizes individuals who've made outstanding creative contributions to music, but aren't necessarily defined primarily by their status as performers. So it's recognition for the craft, for the songwriting itself. Perfect for him.
Absolutely perfect. And we keep coming back to 2024 because it really has been this landmark year for his legacy.
It really has.
The Gershwin Prize for Popular Song, shared with Elton John, yes. But also his personal Ivor Novello Award for outstanding contribution to British music. This sheer accumulation, it just proves that critics, his peers, the institutions, they're finally looking beyond the piano player and fully acknowledging the unparalleled creative force of the writer behind the songs.
It's a recognition that's been long, long deserved. Acknowledging the incredible depth, the sheer volume and the quality of his contributions across so many genres, so many decades. Hashtag ad outro.
You know, what truly stands out when you do a deep dive like this on Bernie Taupin is just the comprehensive nature of his journey. It's remarkable. We start with this shy, seemingly isolated poet in rural Lincolnshire,
Right.
influenced by his Cambridge-educated classics-teaching grandfather, absorbing narrative structure in a farmhouse that didn't even have electricity.
Amazing beginnings. And that shy poet then somehow transforms into the absolute hit machine that defines the sound of 70s rock radio.
Yeah.
Then he evolves again, finding huge success as this Grammy-winning country writer, connecting deeply with icons like Willie Nelson, and then later becomes this respected visual artist obsessed with the iconography of his adopted American home.
An obsession you see reflected right there in the recurring American flag motif in his large-scale art pieces.
Exactly. He's a storyteller whose creative palette just kept expanding, didn't it? From paper to canvas, and whose voice traveled so seamlessly from rock and pop to folk and country. He just never stopped observing and translating the world around him into art.
And it all comes back ultimately to that foundational partnership. I mean, if you ever doubted Taupin's singular importance to the story of modern music, just remember what Elton John himself said. He told the audience at his own 60th birthday celebration.
What was it?
He said that without Bernie Taupin, there probably would not be an Elton John as the public has come to know him.
Wow. That's pretty definitive, isn't it?
It really is. The persona, the legend, it was all built on the poetry.
One man provided the sophisticated, emotional, narrative soul. The other provided the music and the voice that made it global. It's truly a miracle of creative synergy when you think about it. So as you reflect on this long, varied, complex journey of this, well, quiet genius, maybe consider the profound unpredictability of where creativity comes from. What other great culture-defining collaborations might have been started simply by two unknown, recently rejected people answering a random classified ad in the back of a music paper?
It's an amazing thought, isn't it? The greatest connections sometimes really do begin in the most mundane, unexpected places.
Absolutely.
That's it for the deep dive. Thank you so much for joining us.